G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far you're having a brilliant weekend. I know it's a Sunday that you're heading back into the working week, but enjoy it while you can. Now tomorrow I'm in for an MRI. I won't have any results for a couple of days. I'll let you know how I go after that scan on my head. This is just to check if there's any abnormalities that have occurred after the surgery or if the swelling is still persisting there, but I feel a lot, like way better. I feel basically back to normal. But legends, you don't want to hear about me, you want to hear about what is going on in the war. So of course today we have a lot to look at. Of course we have map updates. We have a lot of map updates. It's been another brutal day on the front line for Ukraine. Every day is brutal for Ukraine and Russia. The losses are absolutely massive. This is a war of attrition, and for now over a year it's just felt like who will break first. But we have seen Russia today. Yesterday they occupied a further 62 square kilometers. Today I believe is another 46. It's another massive day, so we'll look over that. I want to talk about money. I want to talk about the rare earth materials that are in Ukraine and what then some of the US senators have said about this. And I also want to look at the Russian rubles. We have seen a decrease in its value. Then I want to talk about what the head of the armed forces of Ukraine, or the former head, Valery Zaluzhny, has said about a Russian breakthrough in the future and industry. And then I want to talk about ATACMS, as we have seen reportedly more strikes of ATACMS back into Russia in Kursk. Of course, we didn't know if we'd see this continue with the use of the IRBM, the intermediate range ballistic missile, the Orshnik. We didn't know what that would happen, and I'll talk about that because I believe Ukraine needed to double down and continue those strikes. But where we're going to start is we are going to start on the map. So let's zoom out of where we are on here. And of course, you have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kursk. Now, we're looking at the red areas and the purple. The red has been occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The green on this map is where Russia had been at some point and has either been pushed out or has withdrawn some areas, a bit of column A and a bit of column B. We'll talk about Kursk and we'll get to that up here. But as we can zoom in, even from a long way out, you can see the large changes that have occurred over the past 2 days. So we're still a long way out here. And if you look from yesterday to today, you can see that there are dramatic shifts occurring on this map. Now, let's come down into Velika Novosilka first off the bat. Now, there are some large changes around here, and we also are looking at where even grey zone has shifted. So we can see these first little blocks of Velika Novosilka. It is looking like there are Russian forces in here. Now, there was geolocated footage just in around here of a Russian column getting pounded by Ukrainian drones. But like I say, that the footage of either if it's a Ukrainian column getting hit or a Russian column getting hit, we expect absolutely massive losses. It's a war of attrition. Who can continue the longest? And just because there has been large losses, if that ground is made, well, it's that command discretion, I guess, to see if that victory was Pyrrhic or successful. But we can see further, just right on the outskirts of Velika Novosilka, and of course, breaking into the first areas of Rozdolny. Now, this is very important. Right, so before I show you the map, I just want to show the other maps. I want to show you something. There's a road that runs up here. Very important. Runs past Rozdolny into Velika Novosilka. Then this connects all these areas here. Now, there is another road connecting through here, but it is a major one. But one of the things that this road does is that this connects the front line of the Kursk area in here, as well as the areas down in here by this road. Now, there are, of course, you can just string through from here, but for command, for logistics, if anything needs to be brought forward or backwards on this road, it does run into further issues. But what we need to look at, I think most importantly and most ignored by many, are the fortifications in here, as this is telling a very critical story at the moment. So, Velika Novosilka, let's have a look. Rozdolny up here, we do have footage of Russians landing Russian forces into Ukrainian positions here by armoured assaults. You can see the turtle tanks being used and other vehicles being used, and combined arms with drones, artillery and tanks. And these are also under fire by Ukrainian artillery moving into here. But by the geolocation update by Deep State Maps, it was on this corner that the Russians were successful, at least in gaining that ground. Did it come with large losses? Yes. Are these losses sustainable? I don't know, because we don't have good numbers. If you're relying on the numbers that are released to talk about sustainability of warfare, shit in, you get shit out. We don't know. I'm going to talk about that up in Kursk, because there are claims that 500 North Koreans have just died in Kursk with zero evidence of this. But let's continue talking about this. We'll look at Syriac. Now, Syriac showed massive advances here in the days prior. Now, he's showing basically fairly similar to what Deep State is showing. This is the same up and around Rozdolny, similar but more ground just on the southern edge. Nothing too dramatic, but this area where coming into the outskirts of Velika itself is more up to this road, but regardless, still fairly similar. But what I want to show you is this advancement up in here. This blue line, that is the major, one of the final major defensive fortifications here. It's not the first line of defense. The first line of defense was 10, 15 kilometers ago in this area. This hadn't moved for a long time. You don't have your first line of defense 15, 20 kilometers behind where the line hasn't moved for years. So let's talk about this. And John Helen, who I look at, that's who we're going to having the map. But I wanted to show you then this conversation here, that Rozdolny will soon be lost. The armed forces of Ukraine should try and hold that 0510 road, destroying Russians in Rivne-Pil before they accumulate and cut off Velika Novosilka and converting the Mokryali River into a death trap. Hence, they are abandoned. So the areas here we're talking of is this road, and this one's like the 0660. I'm not sure on this exact road in here, but regardless, this move up, but it can be a death trap for this if things get cut off. And you can see, as always, Russia working on the flanks, working on Rivne-Pil, these main roads running into this area, and working on the flanks and around. We see many complaining about the same thing has happened again. But then Clement Molan, he also does great maps of fortifications, has said, like, I have nothing to say. The front line hasn't moved from 2 years there. Where are the effing defences? And he is right. The front line here in some areas has not moved for 2 years. In the last week, we have seen 10, 15 kilometres. Yesterday was like 8 kilometres in a day. Where were the defensive lines? We've seen 10Ks in a couple of days with very little resistance, relatively very little resistance compared to some time before. And is this exhaustion? Is there a plan? Well, again, time is going to tell, but we can see just to the east of here, around Kursk, to the south of Kursk, around Ilininkia, where this whole gap in here, this salient is closing up. And I think in the next few days, we'll see from Dalny through to Tredove close up also. But this goes on with the fortifications, both of these fronts. So the reason I showed you that before we move into there is I have on a John Helen's map, he's on Twitter, I have just drawn in very rough around Velika Novosilka, this blue dot right there, that is Rozdolny, one of the defences sitting at Rozdolny. So I've drawn in this sort of very roughly of where it is sitting. But you can see, like I showed you in Syriac, this second last line of defence has to some point come under control, as well as where the defensive works in here are coming under control as well, and how just the axis the Russians are moving on is making some of these defensive works a lot less effective than they would have been otherwise. But the primary concern for me in here, the primary concern, we've seen some of these major defence lines of Kursk to the south of Hostre, to Kurkivka, Seledov, come under control relatively quickly. Now, what you can see is, beyond these, there's nothing. Like, there's very little. And these in here prove to be relatively not that much resistance. What happens if the Russians get into here? Will they be able to reintroduce or introduce deep maneuver warfare? I don't know. Will they overextend at that point and get cut off? Now, I have read a theory that the biggest threat to the Russian forces, the biggest threat, is that they get greedy, they overextend, they get cut off, like a large amount get cut off, killed or taken prisoner, and that balances out the manpower issues at the front. Now, well, I'm hearing manpower of 6 to 1, so it would have to be a massive amount, but could they get greedy and overextend like we have seen previously? But I do think the way we're seeing Russia fight with this attritional just grind forward, and Zaluzny talks about this acceptance of attritional war. That's what I've spoken about again and again. I think while the Russians are having success on the front line now is the acceptance of attritional war and the acceptance that they're not going to reintroduce maneuver into a drone and ATGM battlefield. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, I don't have a geolocation for this, so you're just going to have to go with the random account that I saw post it, but they're saying this is a world first, that it is a Ukrainian drone with a mounted gun on it, firing at Russian positions around Velika Novosilka. Now, I have no idea if it's in that direction or not. I can't see exactly what is actually being fired upon here. You can see other drones in the air, but very interesting to see. Will we see drones on guns on drones come into combat? I don't really know. That looks to have great recoil management. There is a lot of problems around recoil management, very light drones, but we will see. Now, let's move our way just to the east of here, and we'll talk about this squeeze. I'm calling it the Ilinka squeeze, as more areas in here have come under control. Remember, areas in here that sat with the border not moving for years. Vuhledar is all the way back in here, and I cannot say that this wasn't a breakthrough, a collapse in this area from here, this whole move up. This Zolote Neva in here, this felt like last week that this was, had armoured vehicles near it. So let's put it this way. If Ukraine had in a couple of short weeks, let's go to there, an over 10-kilometre advancement, and it was looking like this, everyone would be calling it a collapse, a breakthrough of the Russian forces. So I'll add that on the other side too, that this is a collapsing of areas of the front line. There are breakthroughs. Can it be stopped? Is Russia losing too many men to continue this? These are the questions of which apparently everyone has answers to. Both sides say they've got the correct answer. I'm saying I don't know the answer yet, but we're going to find it out very quickly, or very slowly if those are incorrect. Now, one thing on this, Syriac is not showing the amount of control that the map here, the deep state map with connections to the Ukrainian MOD, Ukrainian map is saying so. In this case, I'll believe this map over that. Like, I'm more likely to believe Russian gains shown on a Ukrainian map than Russian gains shown on a neutral or Russian map. Does that make sense? And the same goes in reverse. If Ukraine was advancing on the battlefield, I'd more likely believe a neutral or Russian map than a Ukrainian map. So let's just move slightly north of here, Kursk, further move out to the west of Beretsky. This is a problem too for the fire control in Kursk. Now, I believe in the next coming days, one sign of storming of Kursk is going to be TOS-1s landing in here. Maybe I'll be wrong, because there are already some saying that Russia is storming well into Kursk. We will see on what the resistance actually is there, and if Russia can get fire control from the north to the south in Kursk itself. So let's bring up Syriac, showing this movement around Beretsky, fairly similar, but also showing, see what I mean about the break-in? Showing a lot of break-in into Kursk in around this area here that's not in grey zone. So again, believe as you will, but it's very interesting to look at what is occurring there. Let's just move up to the north. We have Seledov, Veshneve. Of course, these fronts, the risk is Pokrovsk, Minograd. These would have huge effect economically on Ukraine. We're going to talk about money in a bit. North of Seledov, there was geolocations that showed Russian movements in here as well, further out the train line and further pushing then due west. So let's have, that's the wrong one, this one right here. Again, showing similar, if not less, on this map than Deep State's map. So again, I'm going to believe further advancements with then the Deep State, if we're talking Russian advances in that case. Now, let's continue moving our way up. We have Toretsk, we have some small amount of ground made here, still ignoring a lot of areas in the center of Toretsk itself, and then Bakhmut. Now, this is the area, this has become Robotny Mark II of just ignoring advances. Now, let's have a look. Bakhmut map, we can see where the train line turns down, and Rivka, Glishkivka areas, which you'll be familiar with. That should put an end to these battles in both of these for a large Russian move up into here. I believe we will see this map update soon on this, but again, I think there is some reluctance to show this for a messaging purpose. But what I did speak about, sorry, I forgot about those fortifications. I spoke about could we see maneuver. The big threats is Dnipro and Zap, and many are saying The Russia's not going to stop until they move all the way to the Dnipro in areas. Now, do they have the capacity for that? I don't know, but the front line, that exponential increase, it's difficult to say. Are the losses, because the losses will also be exponential? I don't actually know, but in behind those lines that sit from Zap through the front line, this is what people are saying. Let me bring up this in blue. So just really rough. Let's say the defensive works sit relatively like this in a couple of layers. The problem is behind those layers, what occurs if there is a breakthrough up through here or up through Velika Novosivka, where we know there are areas coming and Russia can do one of these ones, making these lines not as effective or pushing through the lines on a completely different axis. We don't know. We've know many Ukrainian officials talking about large buildup of Russian forces in around in Zap, but in and around to the south of Otokiv. So again, we don't really know. But speaking of Dnipro, we have also seen a MiG-29 destroyed by a Russian airburst Iskander-M. You can see the drone cover over this, as well as just providing shade if people are working on it. And then we can see airburst on the top of that. Now, some have said we don't know the damage. I'll go right now, an airburst like that onto anything that flies, whether it was a Cessna or a B-1 Lancer, is going to have extreme amounts of damage. At the end of the day, these things need to get bloody airborne. Now, let's move our way up just a little bit. Before we get to this red, I just want to talk in this front around Kopanki. So Kopanki right here, we can see that Syriac is reporting that Russian forces have moved into here. Remember, geolocated footage showed right on the edge of this yesterday. Let's see if that grey zone is actually... Yeah, the grey zone has slightly increased in that area because it did come to a point yesterday. So I would believe there are Russian forces definitely present in this area. We come into the Pishani front. We can see further expansion down to the south. What will be interesting is if Russia do plan to cross into Senkove as well. We will see what occurs in here. I don't think they'll need to because it's creating enough problems in and around Berestova, Zova, Kopanki area on logistics regardless. Now let's move into Sudzha. Well, Kursk Oblast around Sudzha where this has been. Now, Reuters, I believe today, is reporting that Ukraine has lost 40% of what it did occupy in here at one point. And we can see from yesterday till today, there is a large shift and a large amount of ground lost by the Ukrainian forces inside of here. Now, some gained, but some lost as well. Now, there is other footage showing more Russian forces took Ukrainian prisoners right in these sheds yesterday, and there was more footage then come out today around this area of Russian soldiers working there as well. So I think likely that is back under complete Russian control. But let's talk about Kursk as a whole. So Syriac maps in here. This is around this area in Dorino in here, crossing into Dorino, taking positions as well. So that's what the footage showed us yesterday and other bits of footage you can find today. But one of the things I speak about all the time is the logistics struggle in here. Now, this is where there is some disagreements between myself and other bloggers. I have said, and I will believe that I am correct in this, that I believe objectively Russia has the upper hand in logistics here by being back in Russian territory. Just like I would say down in, Donetsk somewhere on the front line, Ukraine has logistics upper hand being right in their territory, and the way to fight through is going to be more destruction back here than forward, at least for some of the logistics, such as there's going to be more damage on the border and the roads in this area as a whole, rather than the train lines and everything into Kursk. So I believe Russia has the logistics advantage in Kursk. I haven't seen a solid argument that doesn't feel just like propaganda cope for why that would be the other way, especially with Russia's increased use of Iskanders and drones and Krasnopols around this front. Now, the only good argument back is the use of ATACMS, but they're not in big enough numbers. They're going to hit critical, massive strategic targets alone. And the question is of supply and how many. That is still something to bring up too. But what I've spoken about is the roads and how poor these will be. So this is a Russian fiber optic drone, but I just want you to have a look at how much mud is around here. And this will go from mud to snow to ice fairly quickly. This is striking a BMP-2. Now, it does look like it misses there, but there are videos of it then burning destroyed afterwards. Now, what we saw was ATACMS Storm Shadow strikes in here the other day. Now, this is from Global Defense Corps, and many are confirming this happened by quoting what is below here, although there is no evidence of this at all. And I don't even know who they're referring back to, like who said this originally, or are they just like, this sounds good, type that up. Because they've said more than 500 North Korean soldiers are killed in Storm Shadow strikes as missiles land on warehouse hosting North Korean troops. They also report that 18 dead Russian officers and 33 wounded Russian officers. No evidence of this. If this occurred, I think we would get Ukrainian drone footage of Russians pulling out. I think that is an absurd amount of killed. That we would see drone footage of then pulling out bodies out of here, because it would fit the whole narrative around North Koreans. There's still no evidence of this. The Chechens put up a thing today showing a guy who drove the internet wild, saying, "Oh, this is North Korean, this is North Korean," and he's like, he's from wherever and speaks Russian, and he's fighting with the Chechens. So, again, don't believe everything you just read. Don't believe everything that comes out of my mouth. Don't believe everything that comes out of X, Y, or Z's mouth on this war. It is a ground war and an informational war. I'm doing my best trying to pick through that. I'm doing my best to try and tell you guys how I see the truth. There's no one behind the scenes bloody funding me, trust me. I would have paid for someone to help move my house if that was happening, not me do it myself. All my ties and suits are at the other freaking house. It's a nightmare moving. But the informational propaganda around this war is just absurdly massive. But while we're in Kursk, let's talk about ATACMS, because we've heard claims that 500 North Koreans died from Storm Shadow. The French, they're all right with the Scalp being used, and there has been said to be more ATACMS launches. Now, of course, what we saw in response to the ATACMS working, that Russia used the Oreshnik. Now, I do think that the UK, the US, and France, they need to actually continue to let Ukraine use the Storm Shadow Scalps. Otherwise, the threat of escalation will have worked. We know it's working to a degree. Anyway, will Russia respond to these new ATACMS strikes with another IRBM? I don't know. It seems like they sort of have to, but that's the thing, is escalation. The threat of escalation is further escalation, but if you don't, well, then Russia will walk away going, well, we know that works. But at what point does this get out of hand, and how far is the US or the UK willing to push? As we know, those weapons are fully controlled by those countries. Well, the targeting, the programming, the maintenance by private contractors, all of this. But this is footage from said to be Kursk, and it does look like one of the ATACMS has been intercepted in the sky here by Russian air defense. That's at least what Russian pages are then claiming around this footage. It is very, very hard to tell. But this guy is a diplomatic editor at The Economist, and he has said Indo-PACOM commander, this Mr. Pompeo, says that he expects Russia will provide submarine technology to China that will help it close the gap with the US. It expects Russia to provide missile and sub-technology to North Korea. This is what we have said, that escalation doesn't mean dropping this weapon system. Escalation can mean, well, countries that we see as friendly, I won't say allies, but I'll say as friendly, we will help with further niche technology, some of this technology which Russia is world leading in. Now, the comments on this was, oh, Russia's submarine tech sucks and this and that. Well, unless you work in the Pentagon, I don't want to listen to it, or unless you have a top secret clearance from the Kremlin there, I also won't listen to you, because as far as my knowledge goes, the technology there is actually very good. But there's a hell of a lot of propaganda to say it is shit. There's actually something called, there's white, grey and black propaganda. Netflix goes through all of them. But one of them is releasing propaganda to say that one of your weapons is shit, to try and make your enemy not improve their counters to that system. This is actually very common amongst Western submarine propaganda, is basically to say their subs aren't good, to stop our competitors developing more counters for these. There's a lot around this. But as far as I'm aware, Russia's submarine, and especially their anti-submarine, their ASW, is very good. What we also know is they are a world leader in nuclear propulsion. We do know that for a fact from other engines in ships. This is what a lot of what China would be looking for. The relationship between China and Russia, that is very concerning, because it backfills gaps of where the US has maybe the lead, or that maybe the submarine tech between US and a competitor may be similar, but the competitor struggles in here. So China, their industry for ships is massive, but their nuclear propulsion may be lacking. Their submarine tech may be lacking. Their highly efficient jet engines may be lacking. Their grain production may be lacking. This is where Russia and China can actually backfill a lot of each other's like shortfalls. Therefore, that is why that is a concern to many experts in military around the world. Now, I said we'll speak about the ruble, and the ruble continues to fall some 5% over just this middle half of this month. But cash flow is up in Russia, so there is a supply and demand issue there on the money. This isn't as simple as it does seem just on a graph. Many can explain this as one way or another. The sanctions haven't had the effect. The cash flow, due to a limited maybe oil getting struck, therefore it increases cash. It's so hard to actually know what will happen here. Now, many are predicting that there's going to be a 2025 collapse of the Russian economy. These same people that I'm seeing predicting this, they predicted the 2022 collapse, the 2023 and the 2024 collapse as well. And like I say here, they probably also called the Mayan calendar extinction event of the 2012 world ending as well. If it does, like I've said, whether the front line or whether the economy, I think it will be the bankruptcy rule, little by little, then all at once. And I say to you right now, 2025, the war, which the tide is going at the moment, can this continue that long without massive, like what is breaking first at this point? The front line or the economy? And these are really the two things that are racing at the moment that are causing an issue. And we are seeing some of the sanctions against Russia by like individual nations getting lifted. Now, this is interesting. This is from Senator Lindsey Graham. Let me turn up the volume.
This war is about money. People don't talk much about it. This war is about money. People don't talk much about it. But you know, the richest country in all of Europe for rare earth minerals is Ukraine.
So I believe that is wrong. The richest country in Europe for rare earth minerals, at least if we're talking accessible, is Sweden, I believe. Now, many will say it's Russia. Now, that would be correct, but if a lot of Russia's resources are actually in Asia, not in Europe. So if you'd include all of Russia in Europe, which the border doesn't work like that, then yes, but as far as I'm aware, it is Sweden. But let's continue.
$2 to $7 trillion worth of minerals that are rare earth minerals, very relevant to the 21st century. Ukraine's ready to do a deal with us, not the Russians. So it's in our interest to make sure that Russia doesn't take over the place.
So for the US to use those minerals, we need Ukraine not to lose the war and to fight back in those areas where a lot of those minerals are.
It's the breadbasket of really the developing world. 50% of all the food going to Africa comes out of Ukraine. We can make money and have an economic relationship with Ukraine that'd be very beneficial to us with peace. So Donald Trump's going to do a deal to get our money back, to enrich ourselves with rare earth minerals, a good deal for Ukraine and us, and he's going to bring peace. And Biden's been a disaster when it comes to containing bad guys.
So I will say Biden, I agree with him there. Biden has been a disaster containing bad guys per se. But what I will say is also I'd rather Trump, if I were having a negotiation and I had to either have Trump or Harris negotiate, I'd probably rather Trump with his background in this. But will there be some loan? Because this is what we've seen Zelensky speak about, is like, can we get a loan of a huge amount of money from resources, whatever? But there's also questions around then like sovereign ownership of that land too, because okay, we'll give you this, but then we own it or this or that. And Australia has problems with this too, with like say Chinese coming in just buying up massive amounts of our land. Seems like a good idea at the time. Down the line, well, we don't know. But of course, Russia will be having their eye on those resources also. Now, Valery Zaluzhny, who I want to say as many times as I can, he was completely correct in the decision that I believe ultimately led to his himself being sacked of, we need another 500,000 men. I believe he was completely right. 12 months back, he said that, or more than. If that was in the battlefield right now, those guys would be finished training, they'd be finished being armed, they'd have experience now in the front line. At least the first 6 to 9 months of training of those would have now had 3 to 4 months of experience on secondary sectors. The front line would look extremely different to what it is now. And that still hasn't been done. But the ambassador of Ukraine to Great Britain and ex-chief of the armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, said that the Russians will be able to make a powerful breakthrough at the front after 2027. That's when they'll manage to accumulate a sufficient amount of resources and technological materials. Now, many have said that Russia was strategically defeated for 50 years. Zaluzhny is saying that in a couple of years, they will accumulate what they need to then have a major breakthrough if things don't change. The war pushes the wheel of scientific and technical progress, and it spins thanks to the appearance of robots on the battlefield. Neither the Russians nor we could move forward. A kind of stupor appeared, and this trend continues even now. With drones, with all this at the battlefield, it's very hard to move forward. But this is what I've said. These attacks we see, whether Russian or Ukrainian, that are taking large losses, that's just how attacks in a modern war with drones, with mines, with ISR, with everything on board is going to look like. I don't know how anyone presumes that Ukraine's going to move forward on the front line without large losses either. But this trend that no one's moving, well, what I will say, in the past 2 days, Russia has made another 108 kilometre squares in 48 hours. That is a hell of a long way, and it was likely, I believe, that's by Deep State, I believe it's probably 50% more than this. According to him, Russians now cannot, for example, advance 150 to 200 kilometers in a week. If we are talking square kilometers, absolutely, well, it's been proof this week of that occurring. If you're talking in a straight line, well, no, because the amount is massive. This kind of indicates, and this indicates a kind of stupor and a lack of resources. A powerful breakthrough by enemy forces will become possible closer to 2027. That's when the technical evolutionary process will be completed. So this is concerning. We're almost at 2025. Can't believe it, but we're now closer to 2027. When he's saying Russians will have a powerful breakthrough, we're now closer to that than 2022, when the war started, which is a concern. And by what he's saying here is the Russians are going to become more powerful as that kicks up. According to my own theory, when the technical evolutionary process is completed and the process of accumulating technological materials begins, the opportunity will actively come to be restored. According to my calculations, this will happen after 2027. In Zhelinski's opinion, at that time, the Russian troops will refuse to aggressively overcome the enemy's territories and will use the tactics of attrition here. So will they refuse to come over this aggressively with the use of attrition? Can they continue to do this? This is what we are seeing. But we do not see a deep breakthrough of the enemy, but we see a gradual squeezing from positions that, of course, are given to them with very, very large losses. So working on the flanks, but deep breakthrough. We saw 8Ks yesterday, a couple of Ks in the same direction. Let's go 10Ks in the past 2 days. I struggle not to call it that. If this was the other way, we would have called it that. We did call it that when Ukraine advanced 8 kilometers towards Robotny in the 23 offensive. But as today, the Russians are not ready to expand their front. Therefore, conducting such combined actions aimed at extinction leads to results, including on the battlefield. So these attacks, they can't expand their front. They don't want to expand their front. They're not ready to expand it because of those resources, but could it get worse into 2027? My opinion, and this is completely from me, this war's not going to last till 2027. The manpower issues for Ukraine, the economic issues and pressure for Russia, the way people are seeing this war, and how Ukraine needs to get on top of demographic issues, they can't have, by they being the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's government, they can't have people outside of the country for more 5, 6, 7 years and expect then people to move back. By that time, there's already going to be a huge problem with getting people who have left out of Ukraine to come back into Ukraine. Instantly earn a third less, at the best, less money. The longer these people are outside, the longer these Ukrainians are outside of the country, they're going to set down roots more and more. It's going to be difficult to get the economy running again, to try and get on top of that demographic issue. And it's going to be very difficult for Russia too, to try and get on top of their demographics, to try and get on top of their economy, start exporting oil and gas again. So again, we will see. But at this pace, things are not looking brilliant on the front line for Ukraine. Will Russia overextend, and is Russia losing too many guys to replace? We know they're recruiting somewhere around 1,000, but it's incredibly expensive to recruit because they're not willing to do another mobilization. They're reaching the losses, we presume, by massive pays for recruitment. So again, hard to know, but I've shown you what I see as relevant for today. Legends, I'm having some friends around to have a beer. I will speak to you tomorrow. Have a fantastic day. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend and enjoy the sun. If you're in Australia, it's warm everywhere today. So have a great day. See ya. Bye-bye.